All right, welcome to this episode of Better Call Saul. We have Saul Klein with us here today. Hey, Saul.
How's it going, Jennifer?
Good. Rachel, how are you?
I'm good, Jen. How are you? How you doing, Saul?
Good, Rachel. Nice to see you.
You too.
So we're going to do the hot topic today about the NAR rules. Rachel, you want to give us kind of an overview?
Well, so as everybody knows, NAR's national, annual conference was just last week. So there has been a number of changes that have happened, things that were voted on as during the course of meetings that were held there. So today we're going to kind of talk about the big highlights of what has come out of that and how it's going to change how most of us are going to be doing business. Some of these things are a little controversial, some are not. I kind of don't necessarily find a lot of controversy in some of these things. Frankly, because they're things we probably should have been doing from the beginning. So which one we want to talk about first?
Let's get into the controversial ones.
Well, no, so let's say text without context is pretext.
You got it.
And so most people, when they look at this, they look at it out of context.
Yeah.
And so we have to set the context up. And first of all, the first piece of this context is the National Association of Realtors does not own an MLS and is not in charge of any MLS. Now, if you as a participating MLS, if you're an association or an MLS that wants to be covered by errors and omission insurance for, in particular, antitrust cases, of which there's a tremendous history and millions of dollars in legal defense money spent for that, then you can elect to say, you know what, I'll adopt the provisions of this organization so that they'll help me if I ever get sued. And so that's how this is set up. And so why does NAR change things? Well, first of all, know that it's made up from the local association. The input that leads to the things we're going to talk about comes from local practitioners, people in the field, people who bring it up through, and it's important enough to work its way to the national level to then be included in these guidelines. But then if all the MLSs follow, they get covered by this insurance. So most people want to comply. Most people don't argue about the compliance with regard to these rules. They argue about it at the local level, but usually by the time it gets to this level, it's pretty solid. And there might be some debate on the floor, and that usually takes place. That's always
pretty much everybody's.
But it's all by realtors. It's by people who are listing and selling real estate that are making these decisions. So we've got six of these things, right, that they voted on.
I do want to tell people, though, that you had a very good video about the three-way agreement. I know we've talked about it here on one of the episodes, but you also have a really good video that breaks it all down on your RealTown page.
If they go to RealTown or the Data Advocate under resources, it's called Organized Real Estate.
Yes.
And what a lot of people don't understand, it's about a 20-minute video, but it walks you through these different levels. And one of the most important things to understand is the autonomy of these organizations. We look at it all as one.
Yeah, because it doesn't feel autonomous.
Yeah, well, no, and it's not.
Agreement.
And then there is a three-way agreement, and that's something else. And what that says is there's a trademark. So for everybody, so for the person, the entity that owns the trademark, to make it available to other entities at the state level and the local level.
Yeah.
Right. They sign an agreement. I always looked at it as like a franchise, which early on, that's the way it was looked at. Right. It was like kind of like a franchise.
Kind of like that. So back to what you were saying, that these things, that suggestions, I guess, that came down, if the MLSs want help in being covered by the E&O insurance, which we're all just waiting for that time to come, right? It's not a matter of if it will happen, it's just when. Well,
in my association in San Diego, I, in my career, remember 3 cases.
Okay.
3 major
over 40 years.
Yeah, in over 40 years. So I've been around for a while, but that's a lot of big antitrust cases, right? My good buddy, Walt Bukowski, who ran our local association, runs the San Francisco Association now. He said never swallowed harder than when he got, a letter sent to him as the executive officer of the San Diego Association of Realtors, the United States versus Walt Bukowski.
Oh my God.
That'd be slightly frightening.
Yeah.
Woo! Yeah.
So it's serious business, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but what you're saying is that all of these suggestions and policies were agreed upon because they came from the local, and now the national is everybody should do this.
Right. So it works its way up. Issues and policies will work their way up from people who basically are on the ground level executing and working, and it'll work its way. And sometimes things can be handled at the local level.
Yeah.
And some things it takes, and it typically not the state because of MLS. It'll go, although it could, but it usually goes right to the national because that's where the insurance coverage is being provided. And we change it. It's changed all. I say I'm a realtor. It's changed all the time because the people here try to make this remain in compliance with antitrust laws, try to remain in compliance with association, try to remain in compliance with many things to avoid antitrust litigation.
Yeah,
with the
we don't
Department
want
of Justice
that.
because, it's so expensive.
But there's one that everybody's talking about, and I'm hoping like you can provide some insight on it. And it's the one where the suggestion is that the MLSs will disclose to the public the buyer agency commission.
Yes.
You can take a shot at that, Rachel, and I'll jump in. And
Well, and I think it's important to note too that some of these things that that were passed here, last a week ago or so, were things that were being discussed through discussions between the National Association of Realtors and the Department of Justice.
Right.
So these are some of the terms and some of the things that have been in talks for a while.
Yeah.
Right, and this is one of them. So, when you look at it, we go back to this discussion of always. It's recommended that you always have a buyer agency agreement with your buyer, right? So
yeah, please,
just like you have a listing agreement, please have
just stop and get it all done right now.
Just get it done, right? You got to have one as a listing agent. You should have one as a buyer's agent.
Right, duh.
So when you boil it down to the fact that as a buyer's agent, you should have a buyer agency agreement. And just like on the listing side, you have a conversation with that seller. What are you paying me for my services? Same thing should be happening on the buy side. What are you paying me for my services? So right now, up until now anyway, the listing, MLS listing sheets, client copies, which we have client copies and agent copies. Client copies have never disclosed that information, which means buyers have kind of been in the dark as far as whether or not, they don't know right up front whether or not their agent is going to be paid what they agreed upon between the two of them in their buyer agency agreement, or if they might have to come up with something.
Well,
So
I think it was also
transparency.
coupled, isn't it also coupled with now, I mean, I think a lot of people were saying that it was free to use a buyer's agent, right?
Right. Buyer's agents have notoriously always said, hey, my services are free, so you don't have to pay to use me.
Because they don't have to directly pay. It's more like a dotted line pay.
Well, they're being paid by the transaction.
So that's an important point there is
right.
In looking at this rule, if for no other reason, the public, if it has to appear on IDX sites, and if it has to appear in public display, the public realizes that it's not free.
Yeah,
so it almost helps accomplish this mission
right.
of people who want to say the service is free. Putting that out there like that says it's not free.
It's not free.
So right there, it accomplishes something. Now, something else is that the Department of Justice, and I want to go through the history of this, but they filed a claim against the National Association of Realtors, and they wanted this.
Right.
It wasn't in NAR's rules. They wanted it.
Right.
NAR said, you know what? We want to comply. NAR then said, we'll do what you want. They wanted a couple things, and this was one of them. And then the Department of Justice arbitrarily backed out of the.
Yeah, they were like, we're going to go look for something, some more stuff.
So this didn't go away.
Right.
This thing that the Department of Justice wanted, which was disclosure of buyer agent commissions. That's what they wanted. They're suing the National Association of Realtors over it. Doesn't it make sense to head it off at the pass?
Yes.
And to say, why don't we just change our rules so that they don't have that anymore?
Well, they know, I mean, the NAR knows the DOJ is coming back, right? So it's like, this is like a good faith show of effort of like, we are willing and want to comply. And we already know you want this. So we're just going to go.
And NAR already agreed to do it. And
yeah, so we're just going to do it.
And we're going to do it.
But why? Okay, so I guess I can see like a lot of different sides on this issue, right? It's like, okay, well, if you disclose it, what do you think, how will that impact buyer agents? Like, do you think it would change the relationship with the buyers? Because now the buyers know.
No, because the buyers should know, buyers should have known this anyway.
They should have known
this information anyway.
And the seller is still like paying the broker, and then the broker is paying.
Right. But the seller should, the buyer's agent should always know this information. Why would you go to work not knowing what you're going to get paid? And why would you as an employee take a job not knowing that? It's just too unclear. So,
Yeah.
and
But
it's
do you
going to
think
open
it
up, it's going to
opens
open up
up-
the door for the conversation between the buyer's agent and the client so that there's transparency here.
Yeah,
It doesn't
so
make any sense.
That's the point, transparency. So
Right.
every consumer should know how the people providing a fiduciary service or
Right,
any
right.
service
Agreed.
is being
100%.
paid. And it never was
But
discoverable.
is how they get paid the same thing as what they're getting paid?
I think both, although.
I don't know. I don't.
Well, so let's go back to first, the idea of having to sit down with a buyer or seller, in this case, a buyer, and explain to them where the compensation is coming from. I always did that. You know what? That
Right.
differentiated me from all the other agents that didn't do that. I was helping this person
100%.
as a consumer, and I was teaching them, and I was walking them through. So to me, it was a valuable tool as a practicing realtor to make that kind of disclosure, especially when I knew other people wouldn't. And I would often comment, you know, you might not hear this from other people who sell real estate.
Right.
And there's a
Right.
couple of reasons you won't. One is they don't know this themselves.
Yeah.
100%.
But
And I
what-
do find that it's
we'll
a
take that
differentiator
on.
when you're it's a very good differentiator when you're discussing that with a potential buyer client and they've not heard it from anybody else.
So does it hurt? I think it gives you an opportunity, because now it gives
Absolutely.
you an opportunity to say, I want you to notice here the compensation, how it's listed. And when you see that, understand that the compensation typically flows this way. Who compensates you does not necessarily signify who you represent in the real estate.
Representation,
The
right.
whole thing you can spill out, that builds trust and confidence, because now you're demonstrating expertise.
Right.
And that's one of the
Absolutely.
ways to build that trust and confidence in a relationship. And if you can't get through the trust and confidence phase, you're not going to get them to sign a contract with you.
But what are
100%.
what are agents? Because you have half the agents that are upset and the other half that aren't. I think what I'm hearing them be upset about is that they feel that displaying this will negatively impact their position as buyers agents.
Then they're not
Maybe because they don't know how to-
agency correctly.
And exactly. And they don't know how to have the conversation. So now
Really.
they're like, oh crap, I got to learn how to do this. So
There
yes,
is
it's
no
going to affect my
reason that
ability
this
to be a buyer's agent.
Yeah, there's no reason this is detrimental to
No.
somebody who's a buyer's agent. Absolutely none. If anything, it'll help them when they see 1.5% from one and 2 from another, or 3 from another.
Yeah.
Now it'll help them make a conversation for, in the event I don't get paid this much, would you make
Right.
up for it by paying me this much?
Right.
Right.
I think though, I'm thinking now, like in all of the Facebook groups and stuff like that, there's so many so many posts about buyers that are asking for like rebates from the agent's commission and stuff like that. And I think that they may be thinking that showing this compensation promotes that conversation about buyers asking for rebates. Is that what, do you think that's what
I don't think so. I think that's coming more because there are certain brokerages that offer that as a business model. So now we have to have that conversation, and that particular brokerage, I will print out information. I'll print out the fine print and says, okay, let me explain to you how that works. So that's been a conversation in multiple listing appointments or multiple buyer agency appointments. Here's how this works. If you're a first time buyer, this means nothing to you because you have nothing to sell.
Do
So
you
therefore
think
now we
though
have-
there is this thought process in the industry among some consumers that if you go directly to the listing agent, that you can get the house for less. Now,
Well, here's another opportunity to educate your clients.
Yeah,
Right.
And that might be true.
and sometimes it is true, right?
And that's another opportunity to explain what a variable rate commission is, pull out the code of ethics and explain, here's why I'm going to ask these
But you
questions
see,
on your
now
behalf.
what you're getting down to is people having to define what they're worth.
Yeah.
And what you hear realtors say in all these groups, and I participate in all
Oh
these
my
groups, and I know
God.
it's just like they're not always right and never
I'm
in
gonna be
doubt.
like
All right, and you got people with
unsubscribe.
no experience trying to tell people what, you know, so it's a crazy.
It's like watching a
crazy
train wreck.
situation. So this is not detrimental. What you have to look for are the opportunities in it.
100%.
Right. And so people talk about their worth all the time. You know what this sets you up for? This sets you up to be able to explain your worth.
Yes.
Mhm.
So do you think though that, because here's the reality is that based on the conversations we're seeing in the groups, many people will not be able to do this successfully, explain their worth. So would
Absolutely.
that result in less buyer agency, more dual agency? Because you still have a bunch of states that allow dual and brokerages that allow dual agency.
Right.
Do you think
Yeah.
that, well, what do you think? What's
Well,
your prediction, Saul?
Well, for me, I'm not opposed to dual agency, right?
Me neither, but Rachel is. We should fight her.
It depends on different state. They got different, and dual agency might mean different things in Illinois than it means because we have different rules, and so it means different things. And so I think that the whole industry is changing anyway. I think there's going to continue to be downward pressure on commissions as we reduce the number of hands required to walk somebody through from pre-qualification to closing of a transaction. And as the amount of human time is lessened, then you're going to continue to see compression on commissions. And it's not going to be because people are out there. You're just going to see this compression coming from all sides. The idea that we have to be represented because purchases of real estate are adversarial, that's another argument.
Right. I think too, we've talked about before is that, and I think what might happen is when you see these compressions of commissions, we're going to see realtors that stay in. I think their knowledge base is going to go up, and we'll see the compensation model change, which, I know, Saul, you believe it needs to change anyway. Rachel, where do you stand on that?
I think it's going to ultimately change just for all of the reasons that we're talking about. It's going to happen.
Work for free, 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 close the deal. Doesn't work.
No, it can't work.
Then you got to charge a whole lot to stay.
That's how it's
not
going to
efficient.
Work. Right.
It's not efficient. It's not effective. And so people are going to catch on someday, right?
Right. Well, and I think too, you look at there's times they've had conversations with buyers too, in a consultation situation, and go, okay, well, and they start asking about rebates. Okay, let me explain to you how this works. So here's a property you want to look at. Here's what their compensation is for the buyer's agent, which is me, and paid through the transaction. Let me explain to you how this works. So of that 2.5%, I now have to take out 35 to 38% or whatever it is for taxes because I'm not an employee. So really, when it looks like I'm getting this big check at the end of the day, I'm not. I mean, almost 50%
you don't even
of that
have
is
to pay
already
a broker because you are a broker. But if you have to pay a broker,
you've got to pay a broker. So take your taxes and your broker split out of that. You're left with about 30% of what they think you're getting paid.
And broker margins are 3 to 8% of that. So there isn't a lot of profitability. And I would say that if I could go back in my real estate career and I could take all the time I spent with people and make that dollar producing time.
I'd cut my
fees to 10%, right? and make more money. No, really.
Right.
So,
I know.
it's not inefficient. It's the way we work. It's why, because the public's been led down this path that they believe that it's free on the buy. It all gets to that, and it's not free.
Well, and I think there's going to be a lot of different models that come that are like, don't charge that much. And I think like what will happen is then, because you're giving something up, right? Like everything has an opportunity cost. So it's like, okay, if you're not charging that much, it's probably like the service is going to be lacking. And is that like what you really want, especially in a market like this where it's highly competitive? You might see more a la carte type of situations where if somebody is really insistent on a reduction in a commission, then you may be talking about, okay, well, if you want me to drop it this much or this amount of money, what are you willing to give up as far as the services go? If you don't feel this is important, here's what I feel is important. If you don't feel this is important, then we'll have to talk about removing that. If I don't feel as an agent that I can do my job without that component, then it's my responsibility or my opportunity then to say, hey, then I don't think I'm the right agent for you. Yeah.
But again, all of these things are opportunities for discussion and education of the client. Every one of them.
The biggest inefficiencies in real estate compensation come from this one size fits all. Right. That's where the inefficiencies come from. And if we're really, and that's everything we see, that everything's supposed to cut out the inefficiencies, then this is a big inefficiency that needs to be addressed. And that is any time you turn to a contingency model, it costs more. And I use the attorney example. If you go to an attorney and you say, hey, take my case, and if you win, you get paid. That's kind of like the realtor case, right? Take my listing. If you sell it, you get the attorney going to charge you 30 to 50% for that.
Right.
The realtor going to charge you 6 or 5 or whatever it is.
Right.
And even that's not enough, believe it or not.
No.
Really, to effectively build businesses for a lot of people, and so it allows for all kinds of other things, right? Well, then if I only do it part-time, it can, or if my wife doesn't, I do it. And so you got all these different models.
Yeah.
Right.
And it allows that. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but it's not price efficient.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's interesting. I think those are like the two like biggest changes. So what are your like final thoughts, or what would you say to realtors, Rachel, that are like upset about this change? What would your advice be?
My advice would be to use this as an opportunity to change the way you have buyer consultations, change the way you talk with buyers about how your services are provided, how you're compensated. These are all things that happen on the listing side. Why are we not embracing it on the buy side? These are things that are going to keep people. They're going to keep people out of ethics hearings. They're going to keep people out of real estate jail.
Rachel,
they're
we'll
going to keep
find a
people from
different
violating
way to violate that code of ethics.
Definitely people will, but I mean, I think this is going to change quite a bit, in terms of the just the transparency to the public, and maybe give us a little bit of footing back to not losing the public's trust, but maybe gaining it a little bit, because I think we definitely are on that.
Yeah,
I think we're in a situation right now where the public thinks we're one step above a car salesman, and maybe even equal. I'm not even sure we make it above one step.
I think congressman.
Yeah, congressman.
Congressman, realtor, used car salesman. I mean, we're in crappy company. Let's just be honest. So I think this will, I think this might help us kind of gain some footing with our buyer clients too, and the public in general.
And Saul probably just thinks these are a distraction to the real issue, which is land and property rights.
Yeah, really, we're just going to be beating around the bush here. But really, what you've got is you got a mandated opportunity to step up your game.
Yeah,
100%.
Right. And
what would you recommend, Saul?
Look for people to run ads to say, hey, you might have noticed a change in the MLS. You might have noticed while you're searching all these sites that it lists the buyer compensation. We'll let you know that our company, we're leaders in this and we believe this, and right. Yes. So now here's an opportunity to take advantage of what people are going to see.
Right. Do a video, do something, and just say, hey, if you want to know about this, here, let me explain it. Let me break it down for you in a way you can understand as John Buyer.
Never before seen. Buyer agent commissions. Call me for details.
Call me. You want to talk about it? Let's talk about it.
Yeah. So what do you think, like, if people want to take the steps to like up their game, what is your recommendation for like building that confidence on how to have the buyer consultation, what to say, how to present it, things like that?
So I always started in California with the agency disclosure form itself, becoming more familiar with that and what it means and what you're saying, and then start presenting that early.
That is actually a really good place to start, because that then leads to like
it leads right to it. It says now, how do you get that compensation? Let me explain how. How do you get that representation in a transaction? Because in California, there are three ways you can represent it: represent the buyer exclusively, represent the seller exclusively, represent both as a dual agent. So you can be represented. Fiduciary duty. Let me explain fiduciary duty. How do you get that? Now that leads into the way I do it. Is I use a buyer agent contract, and it's just a lead into the buyer agent contract.
That's it.
Right.
That's awesome. I love it. Well, Rachel, if people have a referral for you in Chicago, what is the best way to get a hold of you?
Best way to reach me is by cell phone, text or call at 630-542-8688, or via email at rreal@dealwithreal.com.
They can also catch you on our What Would You Do episodes on Real
Yes, you
Estate
can.
Fight Club every Wednesday. Rachel.
Yes, you can.
We're starting to call it going to the principal's office every Wednesday.
I think that's a real,
Rachael
I like
Real.
that.
Okay. And Saul, if people want to learn more, because you're really like, you create the context for the conversation and you have the history behind it. And I know for me, like, you know, having these conversations with you over the last, like, I don't know how long it's been, 6 months or so, it's really helped get the history of what I'm really looking at, like what led to this decision.
It's in context.
Yeah,
right.
it's
context.
It's amazing. Yeah. So like, how can we get more of that from you?
A couple of places, thedataadvocate.com. And we're just kind of trying to put as much information as we can about these current events in there, thedataadvocate.com. A lot of stuff that we've done over the years that explains some of these things, like the old NAR lawsuits, at realtown.com. And you can send email to me at saul@bettercallsaul.realtor. That's .realtor. Saul at bettercallsaul.realtor.
Better spell realtor right too.
Right. Yep.
Don't forget the L.
Oh my God. Talk talk about getting in trouble. The day I spelled realtor wrong, man, I almost lost my license. Saul, if you could have
And you
taken it
should.
away, you would have. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate you being on.
Have a great
Thanks, Jen. Thanks,
Thanksgiving.
Saul.
Yeah.